When we hear the word politics, our minds often jump to images of passionate debates in parliament, charismatic leaders giving speeches, or the colorful chaos of an election campaign. We think of politicians making promises, shaking hands, and kissing babies. This is the world of practical politics, the day-to-day activity of governing a country, competing for power, and making decisions that affect millions of lives. It is a world filled with passion, ambition, and conflict. It is immediate, often emotional, and constantly in the news. For many, this is the beginning and the end of what politics means. It is the drama we watch unfold on our screens, something to be either cheered or condemned. However, there is another way to look at politics, a way that steps back from the noise and the fury. This is the world of political science. It is not about participating in the political battle, but about observing it, analyzing it, and understanding it. Political science is the academic discipline that studies the state, government, and the exercise of power. It seeks to understand why political systems work the way they do, why leaders make certain choices, and how citizens behave in the political sphere. It asks fundamental questions. What is justice? What is the best form of government? Where does power truly lie? It is a calm and systematic inquiry into the very forces that shape our societies. This distinction between politics as an activity and political science as a study is crucial. A politician is an actor on the stage, delivering lines and playing a part in the unfolding drama of the state. Their goal is to win, to persuade, and to implement their vision. A political scientist, in contrast, is like the theater critic or the historian who sits in the audience. Their goal is not to win the argument on stage, but to understand the script, the motivations of the characters, and the structure of the play itself. They are interested in patterns, causes, and consequences, looking for the deeper logic that lies beneath the surface of political events. Therefore, to study political science is not to train to become a politician, just as studying music is not the same as becoming a rock star. While some political scientists may go on to become politicians, and some politicians may have studied political science, the two roles are fundamentally different. One is a vocation of action and advocacy, driven by belief and the desire for change. The other is a discipline of reflection and analysis, driven by curiosity and the desire for knowledge. Understanding this difference is the first step toward appreciating what political science truly is. A careful, methodical exploration of one of the most powerful forces in human life. The politician and the political scientist both inhabit the world of politics, but they do so with entirely different mindsets, goals, and methods. The politician is a practitioner, deeply engaged in the art of the possible. Their primary objective is to acquire and wield power to achieve specific policy outcomes. They are partisans, meaning they take sides. They must build coalitions, negotiate compromises, and rally public support for their cause. A politician's thinking is often immediate and practical, focused on winning the next election, passing a specific law, or solving a pressing public problem. Success for a politician is measured in votes, in legislation passed, and in the tangible impact they have on society according to their ideological commitments. In stark contrast, the political scientist is an observer and an analyst. Their primary objective is not to win power, but to understand it. They approach the subject with a spirit of detached inquiry, seeking to explain political phenomena rather than to change them directly. Their goal is to produce knowledge that is objective, verifiable, and generalizable. A political scientist aims to identify patterns in political behavior, formulate theories to explain those patterns, and test those theories against evidence. Success for a political scientist is measured in the quality of their research, the rigor of their arguments, and the contribution they make to our collective understanding of how the political world operates. They are driven by curiosity, not by a partisan agenda. Consider how each would approach a topic like unemployment. A politician from one party might propose cutting taxes on businesses to encourage hiring, framing it as a pro-growth solution. A politician from an opposing party might advocate for government-funded job creation programs and increased unemployment benefits, framing it as a matter of social justice. Both are advocating for a course of action based on their party's platform and their desire to win public approval. They use rhetoric and emotional appeals to persuade the public that their solution is the best one. Their focus is on the should, what society should do about the problem. A political scientist, on the other hand, would approach unemployment from a different angle. They would ask questions like, what is the correlation between different economic policies and unemployment rates across various countries? How does public opinion on unemployment influence election outcomes? What are the historical factors that have shaped different welfare state models? They would collect data, perhaps comparing unemployment figures in countries with different tax policies or labor laws. They would analyze speeches and media coverage to understand how the issue is framed. Their focus is on the is and the why. What is the relationship between these factors, and why does it exist? The aim is not to champion one policy, but to explain the causes and effects of them all. To grasp the nature of objective study in political science, it is helpful to draw an analogy from the natural sciences. Think of a biologist studying bacteria under a microscope. The biologist's job is to observe the bacteria, document its behavior, understand its structure, and learn how it reproduces and interacts with its environment. The biologist might be studying a particularly dangerous pathogen, a bacterium that causes a deadly disease. However, their personal feelings about the bacterium, whether they find it frightening or disgusting, are irrelevant to the scientific task at hand. Liking the bacteria is not a prerequisite for studying it effectively. In fact, emotional attachment or repulsion would be a hindrance to objective analysis. The biologist does not cheer for the bacteria or hope that it successfully infects its host. Instead, they maintain a professional distance, a dispassionate curiosity that allows them to see the organism for what it is. Their goal is to generate accurate knowledge about the bacteria, which might later be used by doctors to fight the disease it causes. But the scientific study itself must remain neutral. The biologist uses established methods and tools, the microscope, petri dishes, chemical tests, to ensure their observations are systematic and reliable. The findings must be replicable by other scientists, regardless of whether those scientists also fear the disease. The science stands apart from the scientist's personal feelings. Political science aspires to a similar kind of detachment. The subjects of its study, power, conflict, ideology, corruption, and revolution, can evoke strong emotions. We all have personal opinions about politicians, political parties, and government policies. It is natural to feel passionately about justice, freedom, and equality. However, the political scientist in their professional capacity must strive to set these personal feelings aside. Just as the biologist does not have to like the bacteria, the political scientist does not have to like a particular political party, endorse a certain ideology, or admire a specific leader to study them effectively. Their task is to understand these phenomena, not to champion them. This objective stance is what separates political analysis from political commentary or activism. A political commentator on a news channel is paid to have a strong opinion and to argue for it persuasively. An activist works tirelessly to advance a cause they believe in. The political scientist, however, works to explain why the commentator holds that opinion, or why the activist's movement has gained traction. They might study a political regime they personally find abhorrent, not to praise it, but to understand the sources of its stability, the mechanisms of its control, and the reasons for its popular support, if any. This analytical distance is the cornerstone of the discipline's claim to be a science. The idea that politics is not just one subject among many, but the most important one, has ancient roots. It was the Greek philosopher Aristotle, writing over 2,000 years ago, who famously described politics as the master science. He did not mean that it was more scientifically rigorous than, say, mathematics or biology. Rather, he meant that politics is the science that governs all others within society. It is master, in the sense that it is the activity that sets the framework for all other human activities, including the pursuit of knowledge itself. For Aristotle, politics was the collective endeavor through which a community determines its values, establishes its rules, and decides how to live a good life together. Aristotle's reasoning was that human beings are by nature political animals. We live together in a polis or city-state, and it is only within this community that we can achieve our full potential. every decision about how this community is organized and run is, by definition, a political decision. The political sphere is the arena where we collectively decide what is just, what is noble, and what is good for the community as a whole. Therefore, the science that studies this decision-making process, political science, is the one that oversees the entire social enterprise. It is the master architect of the house in which all other human activities take place. From this perspective, politics is inescapable because it deals with the authoritative allocation of values and resources for a society. It is the process that determines who gets what, when, and how. Think of all the other fields of human endeavor: economics, art, science, religion, education. None of these exist in a vacuum. The rules that govern the economy, the funding that supports the arts, the ethical guidelines for scientific research, the freedom granted to religious practice, and the curriculum taught in schools. All of these are shaped by political decisions made by governments and influenced by the public. Politics provides the structure, the laws, and the priorities that enable or constrain these other activities. This makes the study of politics profoundly important. If politics is the master science that sets the conditions for everything else, then understanding it is essential for the health and progress of society. A flawed political system can stifle economic growth, suppress artistic expression, and hinder scientific discovery. A well-ordered political system, on the other hand, can create an environment where all these other pursuits can flourish. By studying politics, political scientists are not just examining a narrow slice of life. They are examining the very operating system of society itself. They are studying the master control panel that directs the flow of power, resources, and opportunities for everyone. The claim that politics is a master science might sound abstract, but its reality is visible in almost every aspect of our lives. Politics is not confined to parliaments and polling stations. It permeates society, often in ways we do not immediately recognize. Its influence is clear when we examine specific situations, such as the response to a natural disaster. When a hurricane, earthquake, or flood strikes, the immediate challenge is one of nature. However, the effectiveness of the response is almost entirely a political matter. It involves decisions about resource allocation, coordination between different government agencies, and communication with the public. Consider the aftermath of a major storm. Which communities receive aid first? How are scarce resources like clean water, food, and medical supplies distributed? Who is responsible for rebuilding roads and restoring power? These are not technical questions. They are political ones. The answers depend on prior government planning, the level of funding allocated to emergency services, the political relationships between local and national leaders, and the influence that different social groups have on the decision-making process. A slow or unequal response is rarely a failure of technology. It is almost always a failure of political will, organization, or priorities. The storm is a natural event, but the recovery is a political process. The reach of politics extends even into the supposedly objective world of scientific research. A chemist working in a laboratory may feel far removed from the world of politics, but their work is profoundly shaped by it. Most fundamental scientific research is expensive and does not produce an immediate commercial product, so it relies on funding from government agencies. Which fields of science receive the most funding? Is it cancer research, renewable energy technology, space exploration, or artificial intelligence? This decision is not made by scientists alone. It is made in the political arena, influenced by public opinion, lobbying from interest groups, national security concerns, and the ideological priorities of the ruling government. A change in government can lead to a dramatic shift in research funding. One administration might pour money into climate science, while the next might cut that funding and redirect it toward fossil fuel research. The very questions that scientists are able to ask are often determined by the funding priorities set by politicians. Furthermore, political controversies can erupt over the findings of research, as seen in debates over climate change, vaccines, or genetics. Science provides the data, but politics determines how that data is interpreted, used, and funded. This shows that even the pursuit of objective truth is embedded within the framework established by the master science. If politics is so complex and value-laden, can it truly be studied scientifically? This question has long been a central debate within the discipline. Critics argue that because human behavior is unpredictable and because politics involves deeply held beliefs and secrets, it can never be a hard science like physics or chemistry. However, political science can indeed be considered a science, though one with its own unique challenges. Its claim to be scientific rests not on achieving the same kind of certainty as the natural sciences, but on its commitment to a systematic method of inquiry. Science is fundamentally a process, not a body of fixed knowledge. The scientific process in political science begins with the careful collection of data. This data can be quantitative, such as election results, public opinion poll numbers, government spending figures, or statistics on armed conflicts. For instance, a political scientist studying democracy might compile a massive data set on hundreds of countries over many decades, coding each one for factors like the fairness of its elections, the level of press freedom, and the protection of civil liberties. This allows for rigorous, large-scale comparisons that go beyond single anecdotes. The goal is to gather evidence in a systematic and unbiased way, creating a solid empirical foundation for any claims that are made. Once data is collected, the next step in the scientific method is to identify patterns and correlations. Does a higher level of economic development correlate with a greater likelihood of a country being a democracy? Is there a relationship between a certain type of electoral system and the number of political parties in a legislature? By analyzing the data, political scientists can move beyond mere description to find these kinds of regularities in the political world. These observed patterns are the raw material for building theories. They are not yet explanations, but they are puzzles that demand an explanation, prompting the researcher to ask why this pattern exists. The final and most crucial step is the development and testing of theories. A theory is a proposed explanation for an observed pattern. For example, a political scientist might theorize that democracies are less likely to go to war with each other because their leaders are accountable to citizens who would bear the costs of war. This is a testable proposition, known as the democratic peace theory. Researchers can then test this theory by examining the historical record, controlling for other factors like wealth or alliances. A good theory is one that not only explains past events, but can also make predictions about future ones. Through this cycle of data collection, pattern recognition, and theory testing, political science employs a scientific method to build a reliable body of knowledge. While political science strives for scientific rigor, it faces significant obstacles that are not present in the natural sciences. Perhaps the most fundamental limitation is the inability to conduct controlled experiments in most cases. A chemist can test a hypothesis by mixing two substances in a laboratory, controlling the temperature and pressure to isolate the effect of a single variable. A political scientist, however, cannot simply create two identical countries and apply a different policy to each one to see what happens. We cannot rerun an election with a different candidate or impose a revolution on a country just to study its effects. The political world is our only laboratory, and it is one where countless variables are all changing at once. Another major challenge is the problem of secrecy. Much of what is truly important in politics happens behind closed doors. Critical decisions are often made in private meetings between heads of state, in secret cabinet discussions, or within clandestine intelligence agencies. While a geologist can directly observe a rock, a political scientist cannot always directly observe the decision-making process. They must often rely on incomplete information, such as leaked documents, memoirs written long after the fact, or public statements that may be designed to conceal rather than reveal the truth. This lack of direct access to the most crucial moments of political action means that our understanding is often based on inference and reconstruction rather than direct observation. Furthermore, the subjects of political science, human beings, are reflexive. This means they can think, learn, and change their behavior in response to being studied. If a political scientist publishes a theory predicting that a certain type of government rhetoric will lead to public unrest, politicians may learn from this and change their rhetoric to avoid that outcome. The very act of studying the political world can change it. Bacteria do not change their behavior because a biologist is watching them, but people do. This makes it incredibly difficult to establish timeless laws of politics in the same way that a physicist can establish the law of gravity. Political patterns can shift as societies learn and adapt. Finally, the complexity of causation in politics is immense. A single political event, like a war or an economic crisis, is never the result of a single cause. It is the product of a complex interplay of historical, economic, social, and psychological factors. Untangling these causal chains is exceedingly difficult. While statistical methods can help to isolate the influence of different variables, they can never capture the full complexity of the situation. This means that political explanations are often probabilistic rather than deterministic. We can say that a certain factor makes an outcome more likely, but we can rarely say that it makes it inevitable. These limitations do not invalidate political science, but they do make it a uniquely challenging scientific endeavor. One of the most persistent challenges for any political scientist is the management of personal bias. Since the subject matter of politics involves fundamental questions of justice, morality, and public good, it is nearly impossible for a researcher not to have personal views. A political scientist is also a citizen, with their own political beliefs, values, and preferences. They may feel strongly that democracy is superior to autocracy, that social inequality is a grave injustice, or that a particular policy is deeply misguided. The critical task is to prevent these personal convictions from distorting their scientific analysis. The goal is value-free research, even if the researcher themselves is not value-free. To achieve this neutrality, political scientists rely on a commitment to methodological rigor and transparency. This means being explicit about the methods used to collect and analyze data, so that other researchers can scrutinize and attempt to replicate the study. If a researcher's methods are sound, their findings should hold up regardless of their personal political leanings. For example, a researcher who personally favors higher taxes must still report their findings honestly if their data shows a correlation between lower taxes and economic growth in a particular context. The loyalty of the scientist must be to the evidence, not to their preferred political outcome. Peer review is another essential mechanism for keeping bias in check. Before a study is published in a reputable academic journal, it is sent to several other experts in the same field for anonymous evaluation. These reviewers, who may have different political views from the author, assess the research on its scientific merits. Is the research question clear? Is the methodology sound? Do the conclusions logically follow from the evidence? This process acts as a critical filter, weeding out research that is based on sloppy methods, flawed logic, or overt political bias. It creates a collective responsibility within the academic community to uphold standards of objectivity. Ultimately, the challenge of neutrality is a matter of professional ethics and self-awareness. Political scientists must constantly engage in self-reflection, questioning whether their interpretations are driven by the data or by their own preconceived notions. It involves presenting all the evidence, including findings that might contradict one's own hypotheses or political preferences. It means acknowledging the limitations of one's research and avoiding overstated claims. While perfect objectivity may be an unattainable ideal, the disciplined pursuit of it is what gives political science its credibility and distinguishes it from mere political advocacy or propaganda. It is this commitment that allows it to produce knowledge that is trustworthy and useful for everyone, regardless of their place on the political spectrum. In conclusion, political science offers a lens through which to view the world that is profoundly different from that of the everyday participant in politics. It is not about taking sides in a debate, but about understanding the nature of the debate itself. It trades the passion of the activist and the persuasion of the politician for the methodical patience of the observer. By drawing a clear line between the practice of politics and the study of politics, the discipline creates the necessary space for calm, dispassionate analysis. As the analogy of the biologist and the bacteria illustrates, a dislike for the subject matter is no barrier to its scientific investigation. In fact, a degree of detachment is essential for clarity and objectivity. The enduring wisdom of Aristotle's description of politics as the master science remains powerfully relevant. The decisions made in the political arena set the stage for all other societal activities, from the distribution of aid after a disaster to the funding of scientific laboratories. Politics is the invisible architecture that structures our collective lives, and political science is the discipline that seeks to map this architecture. It is an ambitious undertaking, one that aims to bring the methods of science to bear on the complex, often secretive, and ever-changing world of human power relations. While it is true that political science faces limits that the natural sciences do not, the impossibility of controlled experiments, the secrecy of decision-making, and the reflexivity of its subjects, these challenges do not disqualify it as a science. They simply define the nature of its scientific character. By systematically collecting data, identifying patterns, and building and testing theories, political scientists construct a body of knowledge that is empirical, rational, and non-normative. It is a science built on rigor, transparency, and a constant vigilance against the intrusion of personal bias, policed by a community of scholars through mechanisms like peer review. Therefore, political science rightly earns its place as a science, a social science. It may not offer the iron laws of physics, but it provides something just as valuable, a structured and evidence-based way of understanding the forces that govern our societies. It replaces heated opinion with careful analysis and simple assumptions with nuanced theories. In a world saturated with political rhetoric and partisan conflict, the clear-eyed perspective of the political scientist is more crucial than ever. It provides the knowledge we need not just to navigate the political world, but to reflect upon it, critique it, and perhaps, in the long run, to improve it.